Section 8 of The Outermost House, A Year of Life on the Great Beach of Cape Cod by Henry Beston. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Outermost House by Henry Beston. Chapter 8. Night on the Great Beach. Part 1. Our fantastic civilization has fallen out of touch with many aspects of nature, and with none more completely than with night. Primitive folk, gathered at a cave mouth round a fire, do not fear night. They fear rather the energies and creatures to whom night gives power. We of the age of the machines, having delivered ourselves of nocturnal enemies, now have a dislike of night itself. With lights and ever more lights, we drive the holiness and beauty of night back to the forests and the sea. The little villages, the crossroads even, will have none of it. Are modern folk perhaps afraid of night? Do they fear that vast serenity, the mystery of infinite space, the austerity of stars? Having made themselves at home in a civilization obsessed with power, which explains its whole world in terms of energy, do they fear at night for their dull acquiescence and the pattern of their beliefs? Be the answer what it will, today's civilization is full of people who have not the slightest notion of the character or the poetry of night, who have never even seen night. Yet to live thus, to know only artificial night, is as absurd and evil as to know only artificial day. Night is very beautiful on this great beach. It is the true other half of the day's tremendous wheel. No lights without meaning stab or trouble it. It is beauty, it is fulfillment, it is rest. Thin clouds float in these heavens, islands of obscurity in a splendor of space and stars. The Milky Way bridges earth and oceans. The beach resolves itself into a unity of form, its summer lagoons, its slopes and uplands merging against the western sky, and the falling bow of sun rise the silent and superb undulations of the dunes. My nights are at their darkest when a dense fog streams in from the sea under a black, unbroken floor of cloud. Such nights are rare, but are most to be expected when fog gathers off the coast in early summer. This last Wednesday night was the darkest I have known. Between 10 o'clock and 2 in the morning, 3 vessels stranded on the outer beach. A fisherman, a four-masted schooner, and a beam trawler. The fisherman and the schooner have been towed off, but the trawler, they say, is still ashore. I went down to the beach that night just after 10 o'clock. So utterly black, pitch dark it was, and so thick with moisture and trailing showers, that there was no sign whatever of the beam of Nauset. The sea was only a sound, and when I reached the edge of the surf, the dunes themselves had disappeared behind. I stood as isolate in that immensity of rain and night as I might have stood in interplanetary space. The sea was troubled and noisy, and when I opened the darkness with an outlined cone of light from my electric torch, I saw that the waves were washing up green coils of seagrass, all coldly wet and bright in the motionless and unnatural radiance. Far off, a single ship was groaning its way along the shoals. The fog was compact of the finest moisture. Passing by, it spun itself into my lens of light like a kind of strange aerial and liquid silk. Effin Chalky, the new Coast Guard, passed me going north, and told me that he had had news at the halfway house of the schooner at Cahoon's. It was dark, pitch dark to my eye, yet complete darkness, I imagine, is exceedingly rare, perhaps unknown in outer nature. The nearest natural approximation to it is probably the gloom of forest country buried in night and cloud. Dark as the night was here, there was still light on the surface of the planet. Standing on the shelving beach, with the surf breaking at my feet, I could see the endless wild uprush, slide, and withdrawal of the sea's white rim of foam. The men at Nauset tell me that on such nights they follow along this vague crawl of whiteness, trusting to habit and a sixth sense to warn them of their approach to the halfway house. Animals descend by starlight to the beach. North beyond the dunes, muskrats forsake the cliff and nose about in the driftwood and weed, leaving intricate trails and figure eights to be obliterated by the day. The lesser folk, the mice, the occasional small sand-colored toads, the burrowing moles, keep to the upper beach and leave their tiny footprints under the overhanging wall. In autumn, skunks, beset by a shrinking larder, go beachcombing early in the night. The animal is by preference a clean feeder and turns up its nose at rankness. I almost stepped on a big fellow one night as I was walking north to meet the first man south from Nauset. There was a scamper, and the creature ran up the beach from under my feet. Alarmed he certainly was, yet was he contained and continent. Deer are frequently seen, especially north of the light. I find their tracks upon the summer dunes. Years ago, while camping on this beach north of Nauset, I went for a stroll along the top of the cliff at break of dawn. Though the path followed close enough along the edge, the beach below was often hidden, and I looked directly from the height to the flush of sunrise at sea. Presently the path turning approached the brink of the earth precipice, and on the beach below, in the cool, wet rosiness of dawn, I saw 3 deer playing. They frolicked, rose on their hind legs, scampered off, and returned again, and were merry. Just before sunrise they trotted off north together down the beach toward a hollow in the cliff and the path that climbs it. Occasionally a sea creature visits the shore at night. Lone coast guardsmen, trudging the sand at some deserted hour, have been startled by seals. One man fell flat on a creature's back, and it drew away from under him, flippering toward the sea, with a sound halfway between a squeal and a bark. I myself once had rather a start. It was long after sundown, the light dying and uncertain, and I was walking home on the top level of the beach and close along the slope descending to the ebbing tide. A little more than halfway to the forecastle, a huge, unexpected something suddenly writhed horribly in the darkness under my bare foot. I had stepped on a skate, left stranded by some recent crest of surf, and my weight had momentarily annoyed it back to life. Facing north, the beam of Nauset becomes part of the dune night. As I walk toward it, I see the lantern, now a star of light which waxes and wanes 3 mathematical times, now is a lovely pale flare of light behind the rounded summits of the dunes. The changes in the atmosphere change the color of the beam. It is now whitish, now flame golden, now golden red. It changes its form as well, from a star to a blare of light, from a blare of light to a cone of radiance sweeping a circumference of fog. To the west of Nauset I often see the apocalyptic flash of the great light at the highland reflected on the clouds, or even on the moisture in the starlit air, and seeing it I often think of the pleasant hours I have spent there when George and Mary Smith were at the light, and I had the good fortune to visit as their guest. Instead of going to sleep in the room under the eaves, I would lie awake, looking out of a window to the great spokes of light revolving as solemnly as a part of the universe. All night long the lights of coastwise vessels pass at sea, the green lights going south, red lights moving north. Fishing schooners and flounder draggers anchor 2 or 3 miles out and keep a bright riding light burning on the mast. I see them come to anchor at sundown, but I rarely see them go, for they are off at dawn. When busy at night, these fishermen illumine their decks with a scatter of oil flares. From shore, the ships might be thought afire. I have watched the scene through a night glass. I could see no smoke, only the waving flares, the reddish radiance on sail and rigging, an edge of reflection overside, and the enormous night and sea beyond. One July night, as I returned at 3 o'clock from an expedition north, the whole night, in one strange burning instant, turned into a phantom day. I stopped and, questioning, stared about. An enormous meteor, the largest I have ever seen, was consuming itself in an engulfance of light west of the zenith. Beach and dune and ocean appeared out of nothing, shadowless and motionless, a landscape whose very tremor and vibration were stilled, a landscape in a dream. The beach at night has a voice all its own, a sound in fullest harmony with its spirit and mood. With its little dry noise of sand forever moving, with its solemn overspilling rhythmic seas, with its eternity of stars that sometimes seem to hang down like lamps from the high heavens, and that sound, the piping of a bird. As I walk the beach in early summer, my solitary coming disturbs it on its nest, and it flies away, troubled, invisible, piping its sweet plaintive cry. The bird I write of is the piping plover, Charadrius melodus, sometimes called the beach plover or the morning bird. Its note is a whistled syllable, the loveliest musical note, I think, sounded by any North Atlantic bird. Now that summer is here, I often cook myself a camp supper on the beach. Beyond the crackling, salt-yellow driftwood flame, over the pyramid of barrel staves, broken boards, and old sticks, all a-twist with climbing fire, the unseen ocean thunders and booms, the breaker sounding hollow as it falls. The wall of the sand cliff behind, with its rim of grass and withering roots, its sandy crumblings and erosions, stands gilded with flame. Wind cries over it. A covey of sandpipers pass between the ocean and the fire. There are stars, and to the south Scorpio hangs curving down the sky, with ringed Saturn shining in its claw. Learn to reverence night and to put away the vulgar fear of it, for, with the banishment of night from the experience of man, there vanishes as well a religious emotion, a poetic mood, which gives depth to the adventure of humanity. By day, space is one with the earth and with man. It is his sun that is shining, his clouds that are floating past. At night, space is his no more. When the great earth, abandoning day, rolls up the deeps of the heavens and the universe, a new door opens for the human spirit, and there are few so clownish that some awareness of the mystery of being does not touch them as they gaze. For a moment of night we have a glimpse of ourselves and of our world, islanded in its stream of stars, pilgrims of mortality, voyaging between horizons across eternal seas of space and time. Fugitive though the instant be, the spirit of man is, during it, ennobled by a genuine moment of emotional dignity, and poetry makes its own both the human spirit and experience. Part 2. At intervals during the summer, often enough when the tides are high and the moon is near the full, the surf along the beach turns from a churn of empty moonlit water to a mass of panic life. Driven in by schools of larger fish, swarms of little fish enter the tumble of the surf. The eaters follow them. The surf catches them both up and throws them, mauled and confused, ashore. Under a sailing moon, the whole churn of sea close off the beach vibrates with a primeval ferocity and intensity of life. Yet is this war of rushing mouth and living food without a sound save for the breaking of the seas. But let me tell of such a night. I had spent an afternoon ashore with friends, and they had driven me to Nauset Station just after 9 o'clock. The moon, 2 days from the full, was very lovely on the moors and on the channels and flat. Moon-green isles of the lagoon, the wind was southerly and light. Moved by its own enormous rhythms, the surf that night was a stately incoming of high, serried waves, the last wave alone breaking. This inmost wave broke heavily in a smother and rebound of sandy foam and thin sheets of seethe, racing before it up the beach, vanished endlessly into the endless thirst of the sands. As I neared the surf rim to begin my walk to the southward, I saw that the beach close along the breakers, as far as the eye would reach, was curiously a twinkle in the moonlight, with the convulsive dance of myriads of tiny fish. The breakers were spilling them on the sands. The surf was a swarm with the creatures. It was, indeed, for the time being, a surf of life. And this surf of life was breaking for miles along the cape. Little herring or mackerel? Sand eels? I picked a dancer out of the slide and held him up to the moon. It was the familiar sand eel, or sand launce, Ammodytes americanus, of the waters between Hatteras and Labrador. This is no kin of the true eels, though he rather resembles one in general appearance, for his body is slender, eel-like, and round. Instead of ending bluntly, however, this eel has a large, well-forked tail. The fish in the surf were 2 and 3 inches long. Homeward that night I walked barefooted in the surf, watching the convulsive twinkling dance, now and then feeling the squirm of a fish across my toes. Presently something occurred which made me keep to the thinnest edge of the foam. Some 10 feet ahead, an enormous dogfish was suddenly borne up the beach on the rim of a slide of foam. He moved with it unresisting while it carried him. The slide withdrawing and drying up, it rolled him twice over seaward. He then twisted heavily, and another minor slide carried him back again to the shore. The fish was about 3 feet long, a real junior shark, purplish-black in the increasing light, for the moon was moving west across the long axis of the breakers, and his dark, important bulk seemed strange in the bright dance of the smaller fish about him. It was then that I began to look carefully at the width of gathering seas. There were the greater fish, the mouths, the eaters, who had driven the eels ashore to the edge of their world and into ours. The surf was alive with dogfish, a swarm with them, with the rush, the cold bellies, the twist and tear of their wolfish violence of life. Yet there was but little sign of it in the waters. A rare fin slicing past, and once the odd and instant glimpse of a fish embedded like a fly in the amber in the bright, overturning volute of a wave. Far in, the dogfish were now in the grip of the surf, and presently began to come ashore. As I walked the next half-mile, every other breaker seemed to leave behind its ebb a mauled and stranded sharklet, feebly sculling with its tail. I kicked many back into the seas, risking a tow, perhaps. Some I caught by the tails and flung, for I did not want them corrupting on the beach. The next morning, in the 1.75 miles between the forecastle and the station, I counted 71 dogfish lying dead on the upper beach. There were also a dozen or 2 skates. The skate is really a kind of shark, which had stranded the same night. Skates follow in many things, and are forever being flung upon the sands. I sat up late that night at the forecastle, often putting down the book I read to return to the beach. A little after 11 came Bill Eldridge to the door, with a grin on his face and one hand held behind his back. "Have you ordered tomorrow's dinner yet?" said he. "No." "Well, here it is." And Bill produced a fine cod from behind his back. "Just found him right in front of your door, alive and flopping." Yes, yes, haddock and cod often chase those sand eels in with the bigger fish. Often find them on the beach about this time of the year. "Got any place to keep him?" "Let me have a piece of string and I'll hang him on your clothesline." "He'll keep all right." With a deft unforking of 2 fingers, Bill drew the line through the gills, and as he did so the heavy fish flopped noisily. "No fear about him being dead. Make a nice chowder." Bill stepped outside. I heard him at the clothesline. Afterward we talked till it was time for him to shoulder his clock and costin case again, pick up his watch cap, whistle in his little black dog, and go down over the dune to the beach and Nauset Station. There were nights in June when there was phosphorescence in the surf and on the beach, and one such night I think I shall remember as the most strange and beautiful of all the year. Early this summer the middle beach molded itself into a bar, and between it and the dunes are long, shallow runnels into which the ocean spills over at high tide. On the night I write of, the first quarter of the moon hung in the west, and its light on the sheets of incoming tide coursing thin across the bar was very beautiful to see. Just after sundown I walked to Nauset with friends who had been with me during the afternoon. The tide was still rising, and a current running in the pools. I lingered at the station with my friends till the last of sunset had died, and the light upon the planet, which had been moonlight mingled with sunset pink, had cleared to pure cold moon. Southward then I turned, and because the flood runnels were deep close by the station, I could not cross them, and had to walk their inner shores. The tide had fallen half a foot, perhaps, but the breakers were still leaping up against the bar as against a wall, the greater ones still spilling over sheets of vanishing foam. It grew darker with the westing of the moon. There was light on the western tops of the dunes, a fainter light on the lower beach and the breakers. The face of the dunes was a unity of dusk. The tide had ebbed in the pools, and their edges were wet and dark. There was a strange contrast between the still levels of pool and the seethe of the sea. I kept close to the land edge of the lagoons, and as I advanced my boots kicked wet spatters of sand ahead as they might have kicked particles of snow. Every spatter was a crumb of phosphorescence. I walked in a dust of stars. Behind me, in my footprints, luminous patches burned. With the double ebb moonlight and tide, the deepening brims of the pools took shape in smoldering wet fire. So strangely did the luminous speckles smolder and die, and glow that it seemed as if some wind were passing, by whose breath they were kindled and extinguished. Occasional whole breakers of phosphorescence rolled in out of the vague sea. The whole wave one ghostly motion, one creamy light, and breaking against the bar flung up pale sprays of fire. A strange thing happens here during these luminous tides. The phosphorescence is itself a mass of life, sometimes protozoan in its origin, sometimes bacterial, the phosphorescence I write of being probably the latter. Once this living light has seeped into the beach, colonies of it speedily invade the tissues of the 10,000,000 sand fleas, which are forever hopping on the edge of ocean. Within an hour the gray bodies of these swarming amphipods, these useful ever-hungry sea scavengers, Orchestia agilis, Taylorchestia megalophthalma, show phosphorescent pinpoints, and these points grow and unite till the whole creature is luminous. The attack is really a disease, an infection of light. The process had already begun when I arrived on the beach on the night of which I am writing, and the luminous fleas hopping off before my boots were an extraordinary sight. It was curious to see them hopping from the pool rims to the upper beach, paling as they reached the width of peaceful moonlight, lying landward of the strange crawling beauty of the pools. This infection kills them, I think. At least I have often found the larger creature lying dead on the fringe of the beach, his huge porcelain eyes and water-gray body one core of living fire. Round and about him, disregarding, 10,000 kinsmen carrying on life and the plan of life, ate of the bounty of the tide. Part 3. All winter long I slept on a couch in my larger room, but with the coming of warm weather I have put my bedroom in order. I used it as a kind of storage space during the cold season, and returned to my old and rather rusty iron cot. Every once in a while, however, moved by some obscure mood, I lift off the bedclothing and make up the couch again for a few nights. I like the 7 windows of the larger room, and the sense one may have there of being almost out of doors. My couch stands alongside the 2 front windows, and from my pillow I can look out to sea and watch the passing lights, the stars rising over ocean, the swaying lanterns of the anchored fishermen, and the white spill of the surf whose long sound fills the quiet of the dunes. Ever since my coming I have wanted to see a thunderstorm bear down upon this elemental coast. A thunderstorm is a tempest on the Cape. The quoted word, as Shakespeare used it, means lightning and thunder, and it is in this old and beautiful Elizabethan sense that the word is used in Eastham. When a schoolboy in the Orleans or Wellfleet High reads the Shakespearean play, its title means to him exactly what it meant to the man from Stratford. Elsewhere in America, the terms seem to mean anything from a tornado to a blizzard. I imagine that this old significance of the word is now to be found only in certain parts of England and Cape Cod. On the night of the June tempest I was sleeping in my larger room. The windows were open, and the first low roll of thunder opened my eyes. It had been very still when I went to bed, but now a wind from the west-northwest was blowing through the windows in a strong and steady current, and as I closed them there was lightning to the west and far away. I looked at my watch. It was just after 1 o'clock. Then came a time of waiting in the darkness, long minutes broken by more thunder and intervals of quiet in which I heard a faintest sound of light surf upon the beach. Suddenly the heavens cracked open in an immense instant of pinkish violet lightning. My 7 windows filled with the violent, inhuman light, and I had a glimpse of the great solitary dunes, staringly empty of familiar shadows. A tremendous crash then mingled with the withdrawal of the light, and echoes of thunder rumbled away and grew faint in a returning rush of darkness. A moment after, rain began to fall gently, as if someone had just released its flow. A blessed sound on a roof of wooden shingles, and one I have loved ever since I was a child. From a gentle patter the sound of the rain grew swiftly to a drumming roar, and with the rain came the chuckling of water from the eaves. The tempest was crossing the cape, striking at the ancient land on its way to the heavens above the sea. Now came flash after stabbing flash amid a roaring of rain and heavy thunder that rolled on till its last echoes were swallowed up in vast detonations which jarred the walls. Houses were struck that night in Eastham village. My lonely world, full of lightning and rain, was strange to look upon. I do not share the usual fear of lightning, but that night there came over me, for the first and last time of all my solitary year, a sense of isolation and remoteness from my kind. I remember that I stood up, watching in the middle of the room. On the great marshes the lightning surfaced the winding channels with a metallic splendor and arrest of motion, all very strange, through windows blurred by rain. Under the violences of light the great dunes took on a kind of elemental passivity, the quiet of earth enchanted into stone, and as I watched them appear and plunge back into a darkness that had an intensity of its own, I felt, as never before, a sense of the vast time, of the thousands of cyclic and uncounted years which had passed since these giants had risen from the dark ocean at their feet and given themselves to the wind and the bright day. Fantastic things were visible at sea, beaten down by the rain and sheltered by the cape itself from the river of west wind. The offshore brim of ocean remained unusually calm. The tide was about halfway up the beach and rising, and long parallels of low waves forming close inshore were curling over and breaking placidly along the lonely rain-drenched miles. The intense crackling flares and quiverings of the storm moving out to sea illuminated every inch of the beach and the plain of the Atlantic, all save the hollow bellies of the little breakers, which were shielded from the light by their over-curling crests. The effect was dramatic and strangely beautiful, for what one saw was a bright ocean rimmed with parallel bands of blackest advancing darkness, each one melting back to light as the wave toppled down upon the beach in foam. Stars came out after the storm, and when I woke again before sunrise, I found the heavens and the earth rain-washed, cool, and clear. Saturn and the Scorpion were setting, but Jupiter was riding the zenith and paling on his throne. The tide was low in the marsh channels, the gulls had scarcely stirred upon their gravel banks and bars. Suddenly, thus wandering about, I disturbed a song sparrow on her nest. She flew to the roof of my house, grasped the ridgepole, and turned about, apprehensive, inquiring, seeped her monosyllable of alarm, then back toward her nest she flew, alighted in a plum bush, and reassured at last, trilled out a morning song. End of Chapter 8, read by Shelley Weingart, May 2024, Wareham, Massachusetts.